The coldness seeped into my bones as I stared at the document in my hands. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was undeniable proof that my own flesh and blood had been plotting my demise. A life insurance policy for $2 million, with my name as the insured and my Uncle Richard as the beneficiary. The policy I never signed up for. The policy dated just 3 months after I'd inherited my grandparents' estate. My fingers trembled, not from the autumn chill of my apartment, but from the horrifying realization. The people I called family were planning to kill me for money. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd always thought that feeling like your family wanted you dead was just an exaggeration, a dramatic phrase people used after holiday disagreements. But in that moment, as I sat at my kitchen table with a folder of evidence that shouldn't exist, I felt something physically break inside me. The coffee mug I'd been holding slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound seemed to echo through my empty apartment, a perfect parallel to how my sense of security had just been destroyed. My name is Eleanor Reed. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last decade building a successful career as an investment analyst at one of Chicago's most prestigious financial firms. This is the story of how I uncovered a conspiracy within my own family to murder me, how I made everyone see the truth they refused to believe, and how I finally learned to trust my instincts even when everyone told me I was being paranoid. I come from old money, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. My grandparents had built a fortune in real estate development, and when they passed away last year, they left their estate primarily to me, their only grandchild. It wasn't something I had expected. In fact, I'd built my career intentionally separate from family connections, wanting to succeed on my own merits. The inheritance changed things, not just financially, but in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My mother, Catherine, had always been distant, more concerned with social standing than maternal affection. My father, Thomas, followed her lead in most things, including their mutual disappointment that I hadn't followed the path they'd laid out for me. Marriage to someone from our social circle, children, charity committees, and country club memberships. Instead, I'd chosen numbers, analysis, and independence. When the will was read, the look that passed between them contained something I couldn't quite identify at the time. Now I recognized it for what it was. Calculation. My Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, had been particularly attentive after the funeral. He'd never shown much interest in me before, but suddenly he was calling regularly, inviting me to dinners, asking about my life with what seemed like genuine curiosity. I'd been touched by his apparent desire to connect, mistaking predatory interest for familial care. "You're being ridiculous," my best friend Maya had said when I first mentioned my unease. "They're your family. They're probably just processing the inheritance situation in their own way." But the knot in my stomach tightened every time I was around them. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room. The hushed phone calls my mother would take, stepping outside so I couldn't hear. The unusual questions about my work schedule, my travel plans, whether I lived alone or had roommates. When I'd mentioned these concerns to my therapist, Dr. Winters, she'd smiled sympathetically. "Eleanor, we've talked about your tendency toward hypervigilance. It's a common response to emotional neglect in childhood. Your family has never been particularly warm, so you're reading threats into normal behavior." Her words had made sense. After all, she had 3 degrees hanging on her wall and years of experience. Who was I to argue with a professional assessment? But something still felt wrong. At a family dinner 6 weeks after the inheritance, I'd overheard my uncle speaking to someone on the phone in my father's study. "The timeline has been pushed up. We need to move forward before she makes any changes to the arrangements." When he emerged and saw me standing there, something flashed across his face. Not guilt, but annoyance at being potentially overheard. "Just business," he'd said with a wave of his hand, but didn't explain what business would be conducted at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. I began keeping notes, documenting strange occurrences, comments that seemed innocuous on the surface, but carried undercurrents of something darker. The way my mother had asked, with unusual intensity, whether I'd updated my will after receiving the inheritance. My father's sudden interest in which hiking trails I frequented on weekends. My uncle's questions about whether I kept a home security system. Each incident on its own could be explained away. Together they formed a pattern that made my skin crawl. But every time I tried to articulate my concerns, I was met with dismissal. You should consider increasing your anxiety medication. My mother had suggested over brunch at her country club, her voice lowered so the neighboring tables wouldn't hear. This paranoia isn't healthy, Eleanor. She'd sipped her mimosa, perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the crystal flute. Your grandmother had episodes of paranoia too, before she was properly medicated. It might be hereditary. This was news to me. My grandmother had always seemed perfectly rational, if sometimes stern. What are you talking about? Grandma never had mental health issues. My mother had given me that look, the one that suggested I was being deliberately difficult. There's no shame in it, Eleanor. Mental health is nothing to be embarrassed about these days. We simply didn't discuss these things in the family. Your grandmother had episodes, imagined conspiracies. It's why your grandfather managed all their affairs. I'd left that brunch with my head spinning, questioning my own perceptions. Had I inherited more than money from my grandmother? Was I seeing threats where none existed? The seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with every conversation where my concerns were pathologized and dismissed. But then came the email, a misdirected message from my father's account to my uncle that landed in my inbox instead. The subject line read, ER arrangements, my initials setting off immediate alarm bells. The body of the email was brief. Richard, the policy is in place. Walker has confirmed the timeline. We'll discuss details when you're back in town. Delete this message after reading. My father was not particularly tech-savvy. He'd likely confused my email address with my uncle's, as our names both began with the same letter in his contacts. A simple mistake with profound implications. What policy? What timeline? Who was Walker? The questions crowded my mind, but asking directly would alert them that I'd seen the message. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I decided to do some investigating on my own. My background in financial analysis made me good at following paper trails. I started with public records, looking up any connections between my family members and anyone named Walker. I found nothing conclusive until I expanded my search to businesses and discovered that my uncle was on the board of a holding company that had recently acquired a small insurance brokerage, Walker Financial Solutions. A coincidence? Perhaps. But my instincts, the same ones that had guided me through complex investment analyses and saved clients millions, were screaming that this was significant. I needed to know more about this connection, but I couldn't exactly walk into Walker Financial and start asking questions without raising suspicions. The opportunity came unexpectedly. At a charity gala my parents had insisted I attend, I was introduced to a man named James Parker, who mentioned in passing that he worked in insurance. A few strategic questions revealed that he knew of Walker Financial. It was a boutique firm that specialized in high-value policies for wealthy clients. After 2 glasses of champagne and some light flirtation, I had his business card and a promise to discuss potential estate planning needs. James proved to be both charming and useful. Over coffee the following week, I mentioned that I was interested in reviewing some family policies, but didn't want to go through our usual broker. Family politics. I'd explained vaguely. I'd rather keep this discreet. He'd been understanding and offered to run some general searches for any policies associated with my name or my family's trust. I hadn't expected him to find anything. It was a fishing expedition, a way to either confirm my suspicions or put them to rest. When he called 3 days later asking to meet in person, the gravity in his voice told me he'd found something significant. "This is unusual," he said as we sat in a quiet corner of a cafe downtown. He slid a folder across the table. "There's a policy on your life for $2 million, taken out 3 months ago. The beneficiary is listed as Richard Reed, with contingent beneficiaries listed as Thomas and Catherine Reed." My blood ran cold. I never took out such a policy. James nodded slowly. "That's where it gets interesting. The paperwork has your signature, but the medical exam was conducted by a Dr. Marcus Walker. He's not on any major hospital staff that I could find, but he's certified to perform insurance examinations. The policy was processed through Walker Financial Solutions. How is this possible? I never signed anything. I never had a medical exam for insurance purposes. My voice sounded far away, as if someone else was speaking. Technically, you wouldn't need to be present for a medical exam. If someone had access to your recent medical records and a cooperative doctor willing to falsify a report, he left the implication hanging. As for the signature, well, forgery happens. Can you get me copies of everything? I asked, my analytical mind already working through the implications, the connections, the damning trail of evidence. Officially, no. I don't work for Walker Financial, and you're not supposed to have access to these records, since technically you're not the policyholder. He hesitated. Unofficially, everything you need is in that folder. I could lose my license for this, Eleanor. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you. I won't forget this. That folder was what I'd been staring at when my coffee mug shattered on the floor. Concrete evidence that my family had taken out a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge. The implications were horrifying. People don't take out multi-million-dollar policies on family members unless they're planning to collect. My mind raced through recent events with new clarity. My mother's insistence that I join them at their lake house the following weekend. My father's gift of an expensive bottle of wine from his cellar. A vintage I'd never tried before, still sealed. My uncle's casual mention that he'd have his personal chef prepare dinner. The lake house was isolated, a perfect place for an accident, or for someone to ingest something that might look like a heart attack or allergic reaction in a seemingly healthy young woman. I knew how it would be reported. Tragic death of heiress at family gathering. Perhaps they'd suggest I'd been struggling with mental health issues. Point to my paranoia as evidence of instability. My death would be mourned publicly while my family collected both the insurance money and whatever remained of my inheritance, which would revert to them as my next of kin. The realization left me breathless. My own family was planning to murder me, and they'd convinced everyone around me, even medical professionals, that I was unstable and paranoid. The perfect setup. Who would believe my suspicions when I'd been so effectively discredited? I spent that night in a hotel, unable to return to my apartment that suddenly seemed full of vulnerabilities. Could they have a key? Had they installed something while I was at work? I paid cash, used a fake name, and spent hours researching what to do next. Going to the police seemed logical, but what proof did I have beyond an insurance policy I'd obtained through questionable means? They could simply claim I'd signed it and forgotten, point to my family history of paranoia as an explanation for my accusations. I needed more evidence, something irrefutable that would expose their plans beyond any doubt, and I needed to stay alive long enough to get it. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I couldn't risk being found at my usual places. Then I reached out to the one person I thought might help me, my grandfather's former business partner, Harold Stevenson. He'd always been kind to me, and more importantly, he'd been sidelined by my family after my grandfather's death, excluded from the inner circle despite decades of friendship. Harold agreed to meet me at his home in the suburbs, away from anywhere my family might expect me to be. At 78, he moved slowly, but his mind was sharp as ever. He listened without interruption as I laid out my suspicions and the evidence I'd gathered. "I'm not surprised," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "Your father and uncle have been making increasingly risky business decisions over the past few years. The family fortune isn't what it once was, Eleanor. Your inheritance, which came directly from your grandparents, personal accounts, not the family business, represents a significant portion of what's left of the liquid assets." This was new information. I had assumed the inheritance was just a fraction of the family wealth, not a crucial lifeline. "Are they in financial trouble?" Harold sighed. "They've been leveraging the family name and reputation to secure loans and investments. Your grandfather would be devastated to see it. I tried to warn him before he passed, but he couldn't believe his own sons would mismanage things so badly." "So they need my money to stay afloat," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "But why not just ask? I would have helped if they were in trouble." "Would you have handed over your entire inheritance, no questions asked?" Harold raised an eyebrow. "Because that's what they need. And your family has never been good at admitting failure or asking for help. Plus, there's the matter of the insurance payout. $2 million would solve a lot of immediate problems. I sat back, my worst fears confirmed by someone who had no reason to lie. What do I do, Harold? They've already laid the groundwork to make me look unstable. No one will believe me. Harold's eyes, faded with age but still keen, met mine. First, you need to secure yourself. Then you need to gather evidence that can't be disputed. And finally, you need to expose them in a way they can't control or contain. That conversation was the beginning of my counteroffensive. Harold helped me create a secure plan, not just for my physical safety, but for documenting and exposing what my family was planning. He connected me with a private investigator he trusted, a former FBI agent named Diana Reeves, who specialized in complex family financial crimes. Diana was thorough and discreet. She advised me to maintain appearances while we gathered evidence. The moment they suspect you're in immediate danger, she warned. Right now, they think they have time to set up the perfect scenario. That works in our favor. Following her advice was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I returned to my apartment, installed hidden cameras and recording devices, and pretended everything was normal. I went to work, kept up social appearances, and even agreed to the upcoming lake house weekend, though we made contingency plans to ensure my safety. We need to record them discussing the plan, Diana explained. And we need to catch them in the act of attempting to carry it out. That's the only way to ensure they face consequences. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in acting. I smiled through family dinners, where I now understood the undercurrents of every seemingly innocent question. I accepted the care packages my mother brought, food I discreetly disposed of without consuming. I pretended not to notice the new housekeeper my father had hired, who seemed suspiciously interested in my medicine cabinet. Diana's team was monitoring everything, documenting each suspicious interaction, following the paper trail of the insurance policy back to its source. We discovered that Dr. Marcus Walker was actually my uncle's former college roommate, now a physician with gambling debts that had mysteriously disappeared around the time the policy was issued. We found that my mother had consulted with a toxicologist about certain compounds that were untraceable in standard autopsies. We uncovered a series of offshore accounts set up recently in my parents' names. Each discovery should have horrified me, but instead, they reinforced my resolve. These people had raised me, but they were willing to end my life for money. The family bonds I had yearned for all my life had been illusions. What replaced my fear was a cold determination to expose them completely. The weekend at the lake house approached. Diana's team had swept the guest room I always used, and discovered newly installed cameras and a sophisticated device attached to the ventilation system, one that could disperse aerosolized compounds. Technical analysis revealed it was designed to release a potent sedative that would cause respiratory depression, enough to be fatal during sleep, but appear as natural causes in someone with the family history of health issues my mother had fabricated. We were ready. Diana's team had installed their own surveillance throughout the property. A toxicology expert was on standby. I wore a nearly undetectable recording device. Harold had arranged for a trusted doctor to be available for immediate testing should anything go wrong. Everything was in place to catch my family in the act and ensure my safety. What I hadn't prepared for was the emotional impact of sitting across the dinner table from people who were actively planning my death. My father poured wine with a smile, insisting I try the special bottle he'd brought. My mother asked solicitously about my workload, suggesting I might want to take a sleeping pill if I was too wound up to rest. My uncle proposed a toast to family bonds that can never be broken. Quote, I raised my glass but didn't drink, using a technique Diana had taught me to only pretend sipping. The conversation flowed around me, mundane, normal, occasionally even warm, while beneath it ran currents of lethal intent. It was surreal, watching them play the roles of caring family members, while knowing what they had planned for later that night. Eleanor, you seem distracted, my mother said, her perfectly composed face showing just the right amount of concern. Are you feeling all right? I met her gaze steadily. Just thinking about family, I replied. About trust and betrayal. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps a moment of guilt quickly suppressed. "Well, you can always trust family," she said, reaching for the serving dish. "More risotto?" Richard's chef really outdid himself. "Did he?" I asked, looking at my uncle. "What exactly went into this recipe, Uncle Richard?" His laugh was just a beat too late. "Oh, just a family secret. Nothing you need to worry about." As the evening progressed, I excused myself, claiming fatigue from the long work week. My mother immediately suggested I take one of her special sleeping pills, the same ones that toxicology would later confirm had been laced with a compound that would enhance the effects of whatever was planned for the ventilation system. "I think I'll manage on my own," I said with a smile, "but thank you for your concern." In my room, I followed the safety protocol Diana had established. I placed a body heat simulator in the bed that would mimic a sleeping person and retreated to the connected bathroom with its separate ventilation system. There, I waited, watching the surveillance feed on a secure tablet. At 2:17 a.m., the feed showed my uncle entering a utility room and activating the device connected to my room's ventilation. At 2:42 a.m., my father checked a tablet of his own, nodding at whatever readings he saw. Likely the fake biometric data from the simulator indicating my vital signs were decreasing. At 3:15 a.m., all three of them gathered in the kitchen, speaking in low voices that our equipment captured perfectly. "How long until we can check?" my mother asked, sipping what appeared to be brandy. "Another hour," my uncle replied. "The compound works slowly. It needs to look natural." My father checked his tablet again. "Heart rate is already dropping. It's working as Walker said it would." "And you're certain it won't be detected?" My mother's voice held no grief, only practical concern. "The medical examiner is a golf buddy," my uncle assured her. "He knows to look for the obvious young woman, family history of cardiac issues that Catherine has documented so well with her therapist friends. A tragic but not suspicious death." They continued discussing the details, how they would discover my body in the morning, the press statement already drafted, the funeral arrangements that would appropriately honor the family name while keeping costs reasonable. They talked about my death as if discussing a business transaction, which in their minds it was. I sat in that bathroom, listening to my family plan the aftermath of my murder, and felt a strange calm settle over me. Any lingering doubt, any hope that I had misinterpreted things, evaporated. These people were strangers, wearing familiar faces, capable of calculated evil that I could scarcely comprehend. At precisely 4:30 a.m., as they prepared to check on me, Diana's team moved in. Law enforcement officers, who had been stationed nearby, briefed on the situation and presented with the evidence we'd gathered, entered the house. My family was caught literally in the act of attempted murder, with irrefutable evidence of their planning and execution. The looks on their faces when they realized what had happened, that I had outsmarted them, that their perfect plan had been turned against them, still gives me a grim satisfaction when I recall it. Not joy, not triumph, but the cold comfort of justice intercepting evil before it could complete its course. The aftermath unfolded like a true crime documentary. My family was arrested on multiple charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery. The investigation uncovered even more than we had found on our own. Financial crimes stretching back years. Other suspicious deaths that were being reopened for investigation, including a business rival of my father's who had died under questionable circumstances. The press had a field day, of course. Heiress targeted by family in murder plot made headlines nationwide. I gave exactly one interview, not to sensationalize the story, but to highlight how easily victims of family conspiracy can be discredited and dismissed. How the label of paranoid can be weaponized to enable abuse and exploitation. That night in the police station was the longest of my life. The fluorescent lights cast everyone in a sickly pallor as I sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, my hands still trembling slightly around a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee. Detective Marissa Chen sat across from me, her dark eyes sharp but not unkind as she reviewed my statement for the third time. The evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, audio recordings, the tampered ventilation system. the laced sleeping pills, and the damning conversations we'd captured. Still, part of me couldn't believe this was real. "Miss Reed," Detective Chen said, closing her notebook, "I've been in law enforcement for 17 years, and I've seen some disturbing family situations, but this—" She shook her head. "The level of calculation here is exceptional." I managed a hollow laugh. Should I be flattered that they thought I was worth so much effort? She didn't smile. "What you should be is proud that you trusted your instincts. Most people in your situation would have convinced themselves they were imagining things. You didn't, and that's why you're alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Those words stayed with me as I navigated the chaos that followed. My family's arrest made national news. Reporters camped outside my apartment building. Old friends and distant relatives called constantly, some offering genuine support, others clearly fishing for insider details they could share. Financial vultures circled, sensing opportunity in my family's collapsing business empire. Through it all, I maintained the same calm resolve that had seen me through those terrifying weeks of gathering evidence. Diana, my private investigator, became an unexpected source of strength. She'd seen the worst of humanity in her FBI days, yet somehow maintained a grounded optimism. "Evil exists," she told me over late-night takeout in her office as we prepared for the preliminary hearing. "But it doesn't win unless good people do nothing. You did something, Eleanor. Remember that?" The legal proceedings moved with excruciating slowness. My family hired the kind of defense attorneys who arrive in private jets and charge more per hour than most people make in a week. Their strategy became clear immediately: paint me as the unstable one, a troubled heiress with a history of mental health issues who had orchestrated an elaborate frame-up out of paranoid delusions. "They're going to attack your character and credibility," my lawyer Monica Vega warned me. "They'll bring up every therapy session, every anxiety medication, every moment of doubt you've ever expressed. They'll twist your intelligence and thoroughness into calculation and obsession. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the family dinner conversations where my concerns had been dismissed, the gaslighting, the slow, methodical way they had tried to make me doubt my own perceptions. "They've been preparing me for this my entire life," I replied. "I'm ready." The preliminary hearing was a surreal experience. Sitting in the courtroom, watching my mother, father, and uncle in their prison jumpsuits, their faces carefully composed to project innocent confusion. Their expensive lawyers argued passionately that this was all a tragic misunderstanding, that the evidence had been misinterpreted or even fabricated. The Reed family has been concerned about Eleanor's mental health for some time, my uncle's attorney told the judge with practiced sincerity. Her grandmother suffered from similar paranoid delusions. They were simply trying to monitor her for her own safety, fearful she might harm herself. The insurance policy was a standard estate planning measure recommended by their financial advisors. My mother nodded solemnly at this, her eyes brimming with artificial tears. My father stared straight ahead, the muscle in his jaw twitching, the same tell he'd had when lying throughout my childhood. I sat perfectly still, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me react. When it was our turn, Monica methodically dismantled their defense. The ventilation system designed to distribute a lethal sedative was hardly a safety measure. The conversations we'd recorded about how to dispose of my body and collect the insurance couldn't be explained away as concern. The falsified medical reports and forged signatures spoke for themselves. Furthermore, Monica concluded, "We have evidence that the defendants have systematically attempted to portray Ms. Reed as mentally unstable, including fabricating a family history of mental illness and manipulating her medical records. This wasn't protection, it was preparation for murder." The judge agreed there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, denying bail due to the severity of the charges and flight risk posed by my family's considerable resources. As they were led away, my mother caught my eye. There was no remorse there, only cold fury that her plans had been thwarted. I held her gaze steadily until she looked away. Outside the courthouse, facing a wall of reporters and cameras, I made a brief statement. "Trust your instincts," I said. my voice steadier than I felt. When something feels wrong, listen to that feeling, even when others tell you you're being paranoid. Sometimes paranoia is just good pattern recognition. Those words would become the unofficial motto of what happened next. Within days of the hearing, my inbox filled with messages from people sharing similar stories. Family betrayals, gaslighting, situations where they'd been made to doubt their own perceptions. Not all involved murder plots, of course, but the pattern was the same: manipulation, dismissal, isolation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Diana recognized the significance of these messages before I did. "This is bigger than your case," she said as we sorted through the emails one evening. "There's an epidemic of this kind of psychological manipulation, and most victims never get validation or justice." She was right. For every story like mine that ended with evidence and arrests, there were thousands of others where victims continued to doubt themselves, where abusers maintained control through the simple but devastating tactic of denying their target's reality. I couldn't help everyone, but I could do something. While preparing for the trial, I established the Trust Yourself Foundation with some of my inheritance. Its mission was twofold: providing resources for victims of psychological manipulation and gaslighting, and funding research into detecting and preventing this type of abuse. The foundation became my lifeline during the darkest days of the trial preparation. As my family's defense team dug into every aspect of my life looking for ammunition, I channeled my energy into building something positive from this nightmare. We partnered with psychologists, developed educational materials, created support groups, and established a legal fund for those fighting similar battles without my financial resources. Dr. Winters, my former therapist who had dismissed my concerns, reached out as the trial date approached. She wanted to apologize, she said, for failing to recognize the signs. I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet tea shop far from my usual haunts. "I should have listened more carefully," she admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "Looking back, the pattern is clear, but I fell into the trap of pathologizing your suspicions instead of examining them objectively." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You're trained to recognize manipulation and abuse. What made you dismiss my concerns so easily?" She considered the question carefully. "Partly it was their credibility. Your parents are well respected, pillars of the community. Partly it was confirmation bias. Once I accepted their framing of you as anxious and paranoid, I interpreted everything through that lens." She paused. "And partly it was laziness. It was easier to prescribe anti-anxiety medication than to investigate complex family dynamics." Her honesty was refreshing, if cold comfort. "Will you testify?" I asked. "About how they manipulated you into becoming an unwitting accomplice?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "It won't make up for my failure, but it might help prevent someone else from making the same mistake." As the trial date approached, I received an unexpected visitor. James Parker, the insurance broker who had helped me discover the policy, asked to meet urgently. We arranged to meet at Harold's house, still my safest haven. James looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "I've been fired," he said without preamble. "Someone at my company realized I was the one who leaked the policy information to you. But that's not why I'm here." He pulled out his phone, showing me a series of threatening text messages. "Your uncle has connections, even from jail. I've been warned to forget what I know, or else." Harold called Diana immediately. Within hours, James had police protection and a place in the witness protection program. His testimony would be crucial. He could trace the insurance fraud directly to my uncle and the mysterious Dr. Walker. The night before the trial began, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my hotel window, looking out at the city lights, wondering how many secrets those glittering buildings contained. How many people were living with the gnawing feeling that something was wrong but doubting their own perceptions. My phone chimed with a text from Diana. "Remember, tomorrow isn't just about punishing them, it's about reclaiming your truth." She was right. Whatever the outcome of the trial, I had already won the most important battle. I had trusted myself when everyone told me not to. I had refused to accept the false reality they tried to impose on me. That victory couldn't be taken away, regardless of what happened in court. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day brought new revelations, each more disturbing than the last. Financial forensic experts testified about the complex web of fraud my family had engaged in, desperately trying to maintain the appearance of wealth while secretly drowning in debt. Medical experts confirmed that the compound in the ventilation system would have caused respiratory failure that would likely have been attributed to natural causes without the specialized toxicology screening we'd arranged. Former employees testified about overhearing suspicious conversations. Business associates described my father's increasingly desperate attempts to secure loans. A nurse who had worked briefly for my mother revealed she had been asked to falsify medical records suggesting I had a history of hallucinations and suicidal ideation. Dr. Walker, facing his own charges, turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony was damning. Detailed descriptions of how my uncle had approached him, the specific instructions for creating a lethal cocktail that would be difficult to detect, the promised payoff once the insurance money came through. Through it all, I sat at the prosecution table, back straight, expression composed. I testified for 3 days, recounting every suspicious incident, every dismissive response to my concerns, every piece of evidence I had gathered. The defense attorneys tried to shake my credibility, suggesting alternative explanations for each piece of evidence, implying I had orchestrated an elaborate frame-up due to lifetime resentment over perceived favoritism toward my uncle. Ms. Reed, my father's attorney said during cross-examination, his tone dripping with condescension, "Isn't it possible that your history of anxiety and your family's legitimate concern about your mental health have led you to misinterpret innocent actions? That you've constructed this conspiracy theory because it's easier than accepting that you need help?" I looked directly at my father as I answered. I considered that possibility extensively. I questioned my own perceptions repeatedly. That's what psychological manipulation does. It makes you doubt yourself. But eventually, the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. I turned back to the attorney. "Is it more likely that I fabricated bank records, insurance documents, audio recordings, and witness testimony, or that 3 people with documented financial problems conspired to kill me for $2 million? The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. My mother, father, and uncle were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they were led away, none of them looked at me. Their perfect masks had finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what could have been the family I had longed for but never truly had. In the years since the trial, I've rebuilt my life around new foundations. The Trust Yourself Foundation has grown beyond my expectations, with offices in 7 cities and partnerships with major mental health organizations. We've helped hundreds of people escape manipulative situations and developed training programs for therapists, law enforcement, and legal professionals on recognizing the signs of gaslighting and psychological abuse. I sold my family's company, using much of the proceeds to establish a victim compensation fund for those who had been harmed by my family's business practices over the years. I moved to a new city, bought a modest house with an excellent security system, and adopted a rescue dog named Truth, who snores gently at my feet as I write this. Harold has become like the grandfather I've always needed, offering wisdom without agenda. Diana and I continue to work together through the foundation, turning her investigative skills toward helping others in similar situations. James Parker, now with a new identity in a different state, sends occasional encrypted messages, letting me know he's doing well. The nightmares still come sometimes. Dreams where I'm back in that lake house, the ventilation system humming, but in these dreams, I don't escape. I wake gasping, reaching for Truth's solid presence beside me, reminding myself that I am safe, that I trusted my instincts, that I survived. Last month, I received a letter from my mother. Prison mail is monitored, so I knew it couldn't contain direct threats. But I still approached it with caution. Inside was a single page of her elegant handwriting. "Eleanor, I won't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I won't claim to have changed because you wouldn't believe me, nor should you. I write only to say what I should have told you long ago. You were always smarter than all of us. Your grandfather saw it. He told me once that you had a clarity of perception that was remarkable, that you saw through pretense in a way that was almost uncanny. It frightened me then. It became my undoing later. Perhaps in another life I might have been proud instead of threatened. It's too late for that now. Live well. That will be punishment enough for me. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Her acknowledgement changed nothing about what they had done or who they were. But in some small way, it validated what I had always known. That my perceptions were accurate. That my instincts were trustworthy. That the problem had never been my paranoia but their deception. People often ask me how I've moved forward after such a profound betrayal. The truth is complicated. Trust doesn't come easily anymore. I evaluate new relationships carefully, looking for inconsistencies, cataloging behaviors that trigger alarm bells. Some might call this paranoia. I call it self-preservation. But I've also found unexpected connections. The community that has formed around the foundation includes some of the most honest, authentic people I've ever known. Survivors who understand the value of truth because they've lived without it. We recognize in each other the hard-won wisdom that comes from having our reality denied, then fighting to reclaim it. If my story teaches anything, it's this: trust yourself. When something feels wrong, pay attention. Document patterns. Seek evidence. Find allies who will listen without dismissing your concerns. Your perception is valid, even when others try to convince you otherwise. Paranoia isn't always irrational fear. Sometimes it's your subconscious mind putting together pieces your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. Sometimes it's the recognition of patterns that others would prefer you didn't see. Sometimes it's the first step towards saving your own life. I still have the insurance policy documents framed in my office. A reminder that trusting myself when everyone told me not to was the most important decision I ever made. Next to it hangs a simple quote that has become my mantra: "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you nauseous." Freedom isn't always comfortable. Seeing clearly can be painful, but the alternative, living in a false reality constructed by those who wish you harm, is far worse. Trust yourself. Document everything. Find allies who believe you. And remember that sometimes, what others call paranoia is actually clarity in disguise. Life after the trial brought challenges I never anticipated. The media attention eventually faded, but whispers followed me everywhere. The woman whose family tried to murder her, the heiress who sent her parents to prison. Some people treated me like a curiosity, others with a kind of wary distance, as though family betrayal might be contagious. I understood their discomfort. My story forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those who claim to love us most. 6 months after the sentencing, I found myself at a crossroads. The Trust Yourself Foundation was thriving, helping hundreds of victims of psychological manipulation and gaslighting. I'd given talks at psychology conferences, consulted on similar cases, even contributed to a textbook chapter on recognizing the warning signs of family conspiracy. But professionally fulfilling as this work was, it kept me tethered to my trauma, defined by what had been done to me rather than who I wanted to become. "You're allowed to move forward," Diana told me over coffee one crisp autumn morning. "Helping others heal doesn't mean you have to keep reopening your own wounds." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her words resonated deeply. I had survived, yes, but survival alone wasn't enough. I wanted to thrive, to build something meaningful that wasn't solely defined by my darkest experience. The question was how to honor what I'd learned without remaining trapped by it. The answer came unexpectedly through one of the foundation's clients, a brilliant financial analyst named Mira, who had escaped an abusive partner, who had systematically drained her bank accounts while convincing her she was bad with money. Despite her expertise in finance, he had manipulated her into doubting her own abilities, taking control of their finances, and leaving her nearly destitute when she finally left. The cruelest part, she told me during a support group session, is that I help major corporations protect their assets every day. I can spot financial manipulation in a corporate takeover from a mile away, but I couldn't see it happening in my own home until it was almost too late. Her story sparked something in me, a recognition that my financial background could be leveraged not just to help victims after abuse, but to help prevent financial exploitation in the first place. What if there was a way to combine my investment expertise with what I'd learned about psychological manipulation? That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with possibilities. By morning, I had the outline of a new venture, Clarity Financial Defense, a firm specializing in identifying and preventing financial exploitation in both personal and professional contexts. We would offer forensic accounting services to abuse survivors, educational programs on recognizing financial manipulation, and security consulting for individuals and businesses vulnerable to predatory schemes. Harold was the first person I called. At 79, he had officially retired but still maintained an extensive network in the business world. "It's brilliant," he said without hesitation. "You're using your worst experience as a foundation for something constructive rather than just a warning tale." Diana was equally supportive, offering to help develop training modules on recognizing manipulation tactics in financial contexts. "This is what healing looks like," she said. "Not forgetting what happened, but transforming it into something that serves your future rather than keeping you chained to your past." Launching Clarity demanded all my focus and energy, exactly what I needed. I hired a team of financial experts, psychologists, and security specialists. We developed proprietary software that could flag potential manipulation patterns in financial transactions. We created workshops for vulnerable populations, elderly individuals, domestic abuse survivors, young adults just learning to manage money. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. Each client who reclaimed financial independence after exploitation, each person who recognized manipulation tactics before falling victim to them, these were victories that helped balance the scales against what my family had attempted to do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 8 months after launching Clarity, I received an email that would open yet another unexpected chapter. It came from Robert Chambers, the lead detective who had investigated Dr. Marcus Walker's involvement in my case. Walker, the doctor who had falsified my medical examination for the insurance policy, had been sentenced to 7 years for his role in the conspiracy. "There's something you should know," Detective Chambers wrote. "During a routine review of Walker's case files, we found evidence suggesting your family's plot wasn't his first involvement in insurance fraud with lethal intent. We've identified at least 3 other cases with similar patterns. I believe the victims' families deserve to know the truth. Would you be willing to meet with them?" The request hit me like a physical blow. My case hadn't been an isolated incident but part of a pattern. How many others had Walker helped target? How many families had been successfully eliminated for insurance money? The thought made me physically ill, but I knew I couldn't turn away. If my experience could help others find answers, I had an obligation to share it. The meeting was arranged at the police headquarters, a neutral location where the families would feel safe. I arrived early, heart-pounding, wondering what I could possibly say to people who had lost loved ones to the same type of conspiracy I had narrowly escaped. Detective Chambers met me in the lobby. "Thank you for coming," he said, his weathered face grave. "This won't be easy, but your perspective is invaluable. These families have suspected foul play for years, but without evidence, they've been dismissed as grief-stricken conspiracy theorists." The conference room held 3 groups of people, ordinary grief-etched faces, that showed the strain of long-term uncertainty. Detective Chambers introduced me simply as Eleanor Reed, a survivor of a similar conspiracy. Then he explained what they had discovered. In each case, Walker had conducted insurance examinations shortly before unexpected deaths that were attributed to natural causes or accidents. In each case, large insurance policies had been collected by family members who had since disappeared or were living lavish lifestyles far beyond their previous means. As Detective Chambers outlined the evidence, I watched understanding dawn on their faces, the horrible relief of confirmation after years of doubt. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and hands twisted with arthritis spoke first. "My sister always said her husband was monitoring her medication," she said, voice trembling. "We thought it was her depression making her paranoid. After she died, he remarried within 3 months and moved to the Cayman Islands." An elderly couple nodded in solemn agreement. "Our son mentioned strange tastes in his food whenever he visited his wife's family," the father said. "The autopsy showed nothing unusual, but the insurance paid out $2 million. His wife and her brother opened a resort in Thailand a year later." A young man, barely out of his teens, spoke last. "My mom kept a journal. She wrote that she thought Dad was tampering with her car. Everyone said she was just anxious about driving after her accident. When the brakes failed on a mountain road, it was ruled mechanical failure. Dad got remarried last year to his business partner. They bought a yacht." The stories poured out, years of suspicion without proof, dismissed concerns, convenient deaths, sudden wealth, pattern recognition on a devastating scale. As I listened, I realized I was uniquely positioned to help them. I had escaped the fate their loved ones had suffered. I had gathered the kind of evidence they needed. Most importantly, I had been believed when they had not. "Your instincts were right," I told them when the stories had been shared. "The patterns you've identified match exactly what happened in my case. And I promise you this: we will find the proof. Your loved ones deserve justice. And you deserve to have your perceptions validated." Over the next 6 months, Clarity pivoted to accommodate a new division dedicated to investigating these suspicious cases. We partnered with forensic accountants, medical examiners, and legal experts specializing in wrongful death. Diana's investigative team worked tirelessly, following money trails, interviewing witnesses, reconstructing timelines. Gradually, evidence emerged in each case: tampered medication, altered brake lines, falsified medical records. The pattern was always the same: financial desperation, large insurance policies, medical examinations by Walker or his associates, unexpected deaths, and sudden wealth for the beneficiaries. The first arrest came 4 months into our investigation: the brother-in-law of the silver-haired woman's sister. Confronted with forensic evidence and facing a potential death penalty, he confessed, implicating the sister's husband and revealing their connection to Walker through a gambling debt. The dominoes began to fall. As one conspiracy was exposed, evidence emerged, linking it to others. Walker had been part of a network: doctors, insurance agents, and financial advisors who helped identify and target wealthy individuals for family members motivated by greed. Each successful prosecution brought a bittersweet victory: justice for the victims, validation for the families who had suspected the truth, but also the painful confirmation of betrayal at the most intimate level. I attended every trial, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, a visible reminder that sometimes the truth does prevail, even against overwhelming odds. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of testimony, the young man whose mother had died in the car accident approached me outside the courthouse. Ryan, just 23, had listened stoically as experts testified about the deliberate tampering with his mother's brake lines. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. "How do you keep going when the people who were supposed to love you the most wanted you dead?" It was the question at the heart of every case, the one I had grappled with myself for months after my own ordeal. I had no easy answers, but I offered him the truth that had sustained me. "You recognize that their betrayal doesn't define your worth," I said gently. "Their actions reflect their brokenness, not yours. And you find purpose in creating something meaningful from what they tried to destroy." Ryan nodded slowly. "My mom always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She was the one who encouraged me to pursue music when everyone else said it wasn't practical." His eyes filled with tears. "I stopped playing after she died. It hurt too much." "What instrument?" I asked. "Piano. She loved when I played Chopin." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She said his music spoke to the soul." "Perhaps that's where healing begins," I suggested. "Not in the courtroom, but in honoring what she truly gave you, her belief in your gifts." 2 weeks later, Ryan sent me a video. His hands moving across piano keys, bringing Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9 No. 2 to life. His accompanying message was simple: I'm playing again. Not for him to hear in court, not even for her. For me. Because it's who I am. His words crystallized something I had been working toward in my own healing journey. The understanding that reclaiming your authentic self after betrayal is the ultimate victory. The conspirators in each of these cases hadn't just attempted to take lives, they had tried to erase identities, to override truths, to rewrite narratives that didn't serve their purposes. This insight led to the next evolution of both the Trust Yourself Foundation and Clarity Financial Defense. Beyond helping victims escape manipulation and exploitation, beyond securing justice for those who couldn't, we began developing programs focused on identity reclamation and authentic living after betrayal. We called it the Phoenix Protocol, a structured approach to rebuilding life after devastating betrayal. The methodology combined financial independence strategies, psychological healing techniques, and purpose discovery processes. The name reflected what we all were attempting: to rise from the ashes of betrayal, transformed rather than simply recovered. As the Phoenix Protocol took shape, I found myself practicing what we preached. I began exploring interests I had set aside during the years of hypervigilance and crisis management. I took sailing lessons, something I'd always wanted to try but had never made time for. I joined a book club focused on international literature. I adopted a second dog, a three-legged shepherd mix named Hope, who complemented Truth's steady presence with exuberant joy. 1 year to the day after launching the Phoenix Protocol, I received another unexpected email, this one from a producer at a major documentary film company. They wanted to create a series exploring the cases we had helped solve, with a focus on the psychological aspects of family conspiracy and the journey to healing afterward. My initial reaction was resistance. I had worked hard to move beyond being defined by what had happened to me. Did I want to step back into that spotlight, to become once again the woman whose family tried to kill her in the public eye? I brought the question to my monthly dinner with Harold, now my most trusted advisor, and the closest thing to family I had left. At 80, his health was failing, but his mind remained razor-sharp. He listened carefully as I outlined my concerns. The question isn't whether you want to be defined by your story, he said finally. It's whether your story, shared properly, might help redefine possibility for others in similar situations. What do you mean? I asked. Most stories about family betrayal end in tragedy, he explained. The victim dies, or remains trapped, or escapes but is permanently broken by the experience. Your story, and those of the families you've helped, offers a different narrative. One where betrayal is neither the end of the story nor its defining feature, but rather the catalyst for something transformative. I considered his words carefully. So you think I should do it? I think you should consider what message you want to send to someone sitting alone right now, doubting their perceptions, afraid to trust their instincts, because everyone around them says they're wrong. He reached across the table, his gnarled hand covering mine. What would you have needed to hear when you were in that position? The answer came immediately. You are not crazy. Your perceptions matter. Trust yourself. And even if the worst happens, even if those who should love you betray you, that is not the end of your story. I agreed to the documentary with specific conditions. It would focus not just on the conspiracies and investigations, but equally on the healing and rebuilding process. It would feature not just my story, but those of all the families who wanted to participate. And most importantly, it would emphasize that surviving betrayal was not the end goal. Thriving beyond it was. The filming process was both challenging and cathartic. Revisiting locations where key events had occurred, walking through the timeline of discovery and evidence gathering, describing the moments when suspicion crystallized into certainty. Each step required confronting memories I had carefully compartmentalized, but something unexpected happened as the process continued. With each retelling, the emotional charge of the memories diminished slightly. The story began to feel less like a wound being reopened and more like a case study I had mastered. Important, instructive, but no longer bleeding. The most powerful segments featured the Phoenix Protocol participants, Ryan playing piano professionally now, the silver-haired woman establishing a foundation for depression research in her sister's name, the elderly couple creating scholarships for forensic science students. Each had transformed their grief and betrayal into purpose, not despite what had happened but because of it. My final interview for the documentary took place at Clarity's headquarters. The office hummed with activity, financial analysts tracking suspicious patterns, investigators building cases, counselors working with clients, workshop leaders preparing materials. What had begun as my personal path to healing had grown into an organization employing over 50 people, all dedicated to exposing manipulation and protecting the vulnerable. Looking back, the interviewer asked, "What would you tell yourself on that day you discovered the insurance policy, the moment you realized your family was planning to kill you?" I considered the question carefully, thinking of all the fear, doubt, and isolation I had experienced in those dark days. I would tell myself that the betrayal, devastating as it is, will eventually become just one chapter in a much larger story. I replied. That trusting my instincts when everyone told me I was wrong wasn't paranoia, it was self-preservation. And that one day the very experience designed to destroy me would instead become the foundation for helping others find their truth and reclaim their power. "Any regrets?" she asked. "Only that I doubted myself for so long," I said honestly. "That I apologized for suspicions that were completely justified. That I tried so hard to believe the comfortable lie instead of the uncomfortable truth." "And your family? Do you ever visit them in prison?" I shook my head. "Some betrayals can't be undone. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes the most healing path forward is to acknowledge what was lost, release the hold it has on you, and build something new with people who have earned your trust." As the documentary aired, reaching millions of viewers worldwide, something remarkable happened. The Phoenix Protocol hotline began receiving calls not just from betrayal survivors, but from people currently trapped in manipulative situations who recognized the warning signs from watching the series. Professionals, doctors, therapists, law enforcement officers reached out requesting training on recognizing the red flags we had identified. Most meaningfully, individuals who had been dismissed as paranoid or delusional when reporting concerns about family members' behavior found validation and support. Some were indeed facing genuine threats. Others were dealing with more common forms of gaslighting and manipulation. All benefited from being taken seriously, having their perceptions respected, and receiving help to evaluate the actual level of danger they faced. 3 years after discovering that insurance policy, my life bears little resemblance to what it was before. The woman who once doubted her own perceptions now runs organizations dedicated to validating others. The financial analyst who was told she was paranoid now teaches people to recognize manipulation patterns. The daughter who was nearly murdered by her family now helps others rebuild after betrayal. I still have moments of hypervigilance, still startle at unexpected noises, still run background checks on new acquaintances. But these habits no longer control me. They're simply part of a heightened awareness that has repeatedly proven valuable in my work. More importantly, I've discovered that surviving betrayal has given me a heightened appreciation for authentic connection. The friendships I've formed since, with Diana, with Ryan, with others who understand the journey from betrayal to rebuilding, have a depth and honesty I never experienced in my family relationships. We've all seen the worst of humanity and chosen to believe in the best anyway. If you're facing a situation where your instincts are screaming that something is wrong while everyone around you insists everything is fine, remember this. Trusting yourself doesn't mean assuming the worst. It means honoring your perceptions enough to investigate them thoroughly. Document patterns. Seek outside perspectives. Consider alternative explanations. But never dismiss your concerns simply because others find them inconvenient or uncomfortable. Sometimes what looks like paranoia is actually pattern recognition. Sometimes the voice whispering, "Something isn't right," is your most reliable guide. And sometimes, trusting that voice when everyone tells you not to, is the difference between life and death. Your story doesn't end with betrayal. It doesn't end with survival. It continues with every choice you make to build something meaningful from what others tried to destroy. Trust yourself. Document everything. Find allies who believe in you. And remember that the most powerful response to those who tried to erase you is to live fully, authentically, and purposefully. Not in spite of what happened, but because of what it taught you about your own strength and resilience. The truth may not always set you free immediately, but recognizing it, speaking it, and acting on it will eventually lead you to a freedom deeper and more authentic than any you could have imagined, while living within the constraints of manipulation and lies. 5 years after uncovering my family's murder plot, I found myself standing before an audience of 3,000 at the Global Conference on Psychological Safety. The grand ballroom of the convention center hummed with anticipation. Mental health professionals, law enforcement officers, financial security experts, and survivors had gathered from around the world to share knowledge about recognizing and combating psychological manipulation. As I adjusted the microphone, I caught sight of familiar faces in the front row. Diana, her investigative instincts now channeled into training law enforcement to spot family conspiracy. Ryan, whose piano career had flourished alongside his advocacy for children who had lost parents to suspicious circumstances. And Harold's daughter Melissa, carrying on her father's legacy after his peaceful passing the previous year. When we talk about psychological safety, I began, we often focus on workplace environments or therapeutic settings. But the most dangerous psychological warfare often happens where we least expect it, in our own homes, among people who claim to love us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The audience leaned forward slightly, collective attention sharpening. Many knew parts of my story from the documentary, but few had heard me speak in person about the broader implications of what my experience had revealed. Not just about family betrayal, but about our collective blindness to certain forms of psychological danger. 5 years ago, I discovered that my family was planning to murder me for my inheritance and insurance money. When I first suspected something was wrong, I did what most of us are taught to do. I sought professional help. My therapist told me I was paranoid. I spoke to family friends who insisted I was misinterpreting innocent behaviors. I even began to doubt myself, wondering if perhaps I was imagining dangers that didn't exist. I paused, scanning the attentive faces before me. This is the insidious nature of gaslighting on a systemic level. It's not just individuals who gaslight us. Sometimes entire systems are structured to make us doubt our own perceptions, when those perceptions threaten established power dynamics or comfortable narratives. This had become the core of my work over the past 2 years, examining how gaslighting functions not just in interpersonal relationships but in broader social contexts. How certain voices are systematically dismissed as paranoid or hysterical when they identify patterns of harm. How institutions often protect their own interests by discrediting those who challenge them. The most dangerous phrase in any language isn't a threat or a slur, I continued. It's, you're being paranoid. These 3 words have silenced more valid concerns, enabled more abuse, and perpetuated more harm than perhaps any others. They shift the problem from the suspicious behavior to the person who notices it. They transform vigilance into pathology. As I spoke, I could see recognition dawning on many faces. Therapists reconsidering patients they might have dismissed. Police officers remembering reports they hadn't taken seriously. Individuals reflecting on their own experiences of having concerns invalidated. This doesn't mean every suspicion is valid, or every conspiracy theory is true, I clarified. Critical thinking remains essential, but we must distinguish between unfounded paranoia and legitimate pattern recognition. The difference lies in how we respond to concerns, not by dismissing them outright, but by investigating them thoroughly. I outlined the methodology we had developed through the Phoenix Protocol and Clarity Financial Defense, the documentation systems, threat assessment matrices, and evidence-gathering protocols that help distinguish genuine danger from unfounded fear. I shared case studies where these tools had identified real threats before they materialized, as well as instances where they had provided reassurance that no actual danger existed. The goal isn't to make everyone suspicious, I emphasized. It's to create systems where concerns can be evaluated objectively, where pattern recognition is valued rather than pathologized, and where validation doesn't require victimization first. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After my keynote, I spent hours in conversation with conference attendees, professionals seeking to improve their practices, survivors sharing their experiences, researchers proposing collaborations. Each conversation reinforced what had become increasingly clear over the past 5 years. My personal nightmare had illuminated systemic problems that affected countless lives. As the conference came to a close, I received an unexpected invitation to meet with members of the Senate Judiciary Committee who were developing legislation on financial exploitation and psychological abuse. The Trust Yourself Foundation had been advocating for legal reforms for years, but this was the first indication that federal lawmakers were taking serious interest in our work. The meeting was scheduled for the following month in Washington, D.C. In the weeks leading up to it, my team prepared comprehensive policy recommendations based on our years of case data. We focused on 3 key areas: strengthening legal protections against financial exploitation, improving training for mental health professionals to recognize manipulation and gaslighting, and establishing better oversight for insurance policies and estate planning when vulnerable individuals were involved. Diana joined me for the preparation sessions, her investigative experience proving invaluable as we anticipated potential challenges and counter-arguments. Remember, she cautioned during our final review, political systems resist change as reflexively as families do. They'll look for ways to minimize the problem, to suggest these are isolated incidents rather than systemic failures. She was right, of course. At the hearing, several senators questioned whether new legislation was really necessary, suggesting that existing laws against fraud and conspiracy were sufficient. Others expressed concern about potential overreach, about creating systems that might encourage false accusations within families. I had anticipated these objections. When my turn came to speak, I placed a stack of files on the table before me, case after case where existing laws had failed to protect victims, where reasonable doubt had allowed exploiters to continue their abuses, where the burden of proof had been impossibly high for those being psychologically manipulated. These aren't theoretical concerns, I told the committee, my voice steady. Each of these files represents a real person whose concerns were dismissed until it was too late. Each represents a failure of our current systems to recognize psychological manipulation as a genuine threat. And tragically, for many of these individuals, this failure was fatal. I shared statistics from our foundation's research, how reports of financial exploitation were dismissed at significantly higher rates when the alleged perpetrators were family members, how women's concerns about safety were labeled as anxiety more often than men's similar concerns, how elderly individuals reporting manipulation by relatives were frequently diagnosed with paranoia rather than having their claims investigated. When we dismiss someone as paranoid, I concluded, we're not just invalidating their current concerns, we're teaching them to doubt their own perceptions going forward. We're making them more vulnerable to future exploitation, not less. And in doing so, we become unwitting accomplices to those who would harm them. The committee's questions afterward were more thoughtful, more engaged. Several senators requested additional data, specific policy language, estimates of implementation costs. These were the questions of people taking the issue seriously, considering genuine action rather than performative concern. As the hearing adjourned, Senator Marina Reyes, the committee chair, approached me privately. "Your testimony was compelling," she said. "But I suspect there's more to your investment in this issue than professional interest." I hesitated, then nodded. While my story had been documented in the press and featured in the documentary, I had rarely discussed it in professional or policy contexts, preferring to focus on the broader issues rather than my personal experience. "Would you be willing to share your story more directly?" she asked. "Not just in hearings like this, but in a more public campaign? Personal narratives change minds in ways statistics simply can't." Her request gave me pause. I had worked hard to build an identity beyond victim or survivor, to be recognized for my expertise rather than my trauma. But I also understood the power of first-person testimony, how it could reach people who might remain unmoved by even the most compelling data. "I'll consider it," I promised. but only as part of a broader campaign that includes multiple voices and perspectives. My story is just one among thousands. Senator Reyes nodded. Of course. Diversity of experience is essential. But your combination of personal insight and professional expertise is unique. Think about it. That evening, back in my hotel room, I contemplated the senator's request. Was I willing to step more fully into the public eye, to become not just an advocate but a symbol? The private life I had carefully rebuilt felt precious, hard-won. Yet I couldn't deny that my story had the power to open doors that might otherwise remain closed to this crucial conversation. I called Ryan, whose journey from bereaved son to advocate I had watched unfold over the years. How do you balance it? I asked. Being both yourself and a symbol of something larger? I don't always succeed, he admitted. Some days the weight of representing all survivors of family conspiracy feels impossible. Other days, when someone tells me my story helped them trust their instincts and avoid a similar fate, it feels worth every difficult moment. His perspective helped clarify my thinking. This wasn't about sacrificing my privacy for publicity. It was about using my unique position to create change that could save lives. The key would be maintaining boundaries, ensuring my public role served the cause without consuming my entire identity. The next morning, I called Senator Reyes and agreed to participate in a public awareness campaign, with specific conditions. I would be involved in shaping the messaging, other survivors would be featured alongside me, and the focus would remain on systemic solutions rather than sensationalizing individual tragedies. Over the following months, what began as a potential Senate bill evolved into a comprehensive legislative package addressing psychological abuse and financial exploitation. The Trust Yourself Act, as it came to be known, included provisions for specialized training for law enforcement and mental health professionals, enhanced protections for whistleblowers reporting family financial crimes, and new standards for validating insurance policies when large sums and family beneficiaries were involved. As the bill gained momentum, opposition emerged from unexpected quarters. Insurance industry lobbyists argued the new regulations would be burdensome and costly. Some mental health professional organizations expressed concern about potential liability if they failed to identify manipulation. Conservative family advocacy groups worried about government interference in private family matters. These challenges required a strategic response. We organized testimony from insurance professionals who had helped uncover fraud, therapists who had learned to recognize manipulation tactics, and family members who wished they had been able to protect loved ones before tragedy struck. We compiled cost analyses showing how preventing exploitation would actually save money compared to investigating crimes after the fact. Most powerful were the town halls and community forums where survivors shared their stories directly with the public. In city after city, people lined up to hear first-hand accounts of manipulation, gaslighting, and exploitation, and to learn how to recognize warning signs in their own lives or the lives of loved ones. I participated in many of these events but made sure I wasn't the only voice or the central focus. Each forum featured local survivors, regional experts, and community resources. The message was consistent. This isn't about one dramatic case. It's about a widespread problem that touches communities everywhere. As public awareness grew, so did support for the legislation. Senators who had initially been skeptical began hearing from constituents, with their own stories of family betrayal and institutional dismissal. The narrative shifted from rare, isolated incidents to recognition of a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. 1 year after the initial Senate hearing, I stood in the Rose Garden watching as the President signed the Trust Yourself Act into law. The ceremony was attended by dozens of survivors whose advocacy had helped make this moment possible, including Ryan, whose mother's quote, 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 na quote, 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 wheel quote, 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 would quote, 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 with his father serving a life sentence. This legislation won't bring back those we've lost to family conspiracy and exploitation, the president acknowledged in her remarks. But it will help ensure their stories are not repeated. It will give weight to concerns that have too often been dismissed. And perhaps most importantly, it will begin to change the culture that enables psychological abuse by teaching people to doubt their own perceptions. As meaningful as this legislative victory was, I knew laws alone wouldn't solve the problem. Cultural change required ongoing education, awareness, and individual empowerment. Which is why, even as we celebrated this milestone, the Trust Yourself Foundation was launching its most ambitious initiative yet, a nationwide education program bringing manipulation recognition and prevention training to high schools, colleges, and community centers. The curriculum, developed by psychologists, survivors, and education specialists, taught basic pattern recognition, documentation techniques, and resource identification. It emphasized critical thinking and evidence gathering rather than suspicion, helping students distinguish between healthy skepticism and unfounded paranoia. Most importantly, it normalized the process of seeking outside perspectives when something feels wrong, breaking the isolation that makes manipulation possible. Pilot programs in 50 schools showed promising results. Students reported greater confidence in identifying manipulative tactics, increased willingness to document concerning patterns, and improved ability to seek appropriate help when needed. Teachers noted that the skills transferred to other areas, helping students recognize everything from online scams to peer pressure tactics. This educational approach represented the evolution of my understanding over the past 5 years. While my family's murder plot had been extreme, the manipulation tactics they employed were common across many types of relationships. The gaslighting that made me doubt my perceptions, the isolation that limited my access to outside perspectives, the authority figures who reinforced my self-doubt. These patterns appeared in abusive relationships of all kinds. By teaching recognition of these universal patterns, we could help people protect themselves not just from rare murder conspiracies, but from the more common forms of exploitation and abuse that damage millions of lives. This realization had transformed my work from a specific focus on family conspiracy to a broader mission of psychological empowerment. On the 5th anniversary of the day I discovered the insurance policy, I returned to the lake house where my family had planned to kill me. The property had been sold after their arrests, the proceeds divided among victims of their financial crimes. The new owners, a young couple with 2 small children, had renovated extensively, removing all traces of its dark history. My circle now included people of genuine integrity. Diana, whose unwavering belief had helped save my life. Ryan, whose parallel journey of healing and purpose mirrored my own in many ways. The survivors who had become advocates through the Foundation's programs. The professionals who had committed to improving systems that had failed so many. These relationships, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation, represented a different kind of family, one chosen with clear eyes and maintained with honest communication. They reminded me daily that while betrayal teaches caution, it need not teach isolation. As I watched the sunset painting the lake in shades of gold and crimson, I thought about all the people who might be sitting alone at this moment, doubting their perceptions because someone they trusted had told them they were wrong, crazy, paranoid. I thought about those who had reached out after hearing my story, saying it had given them courage to trust themselves, to gather evidence, to seek help from the right sources. I thought about the high school students learning to recognize manipulation tactics before entering adult relationships, the law enforcement officers being trained to take psychological abuse seriously, the therapists developing new protocols for distinguishing legitimate concerns from unfounded anxiety. And I realized that while the trauma of betrayal never completely disappears, it can be transformed. The hypervigilance that once felt like a burden had become a finely tuned instrument for detecting manipulation and protecting others. The documentation habits that had saved my life now formed the basis for educational programs empowering thousands. The painful lessons in discernment had become wisdom I could share. Trust yourself. Document everything. Seek allies who take your concerns seriously. These simple principles had saved my life and now formed the foundation of a movement. Not because betrayal is inevitable, but because when it does occur, No one should face it alone or unarmed with knowledge. As darkness fell over the lake, I turned back toward the house, now filled with light and conversation. Tonight was not about the past, but about celebrating how far we had come. The legislation passed, the lives saved, the cultural shift slowly taking root. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Expanding educational programs, refining investigative protocols, supporting survivors through healing and rebuilding. The work continues because the need continues. But tonight, in this place once intended for ending, I chose to focus on beginnings, on everything that becomes possible when we refuse to doubt our own perceptions, when we insist on our right to safety and truth, when we transform our most painful experiences into protection for others. If you're facing your own moment of doubt, wondering if your concerns are valid when everyone tells you they're not, remember this: trust yourself. Your perceptions matter. Your safety matters. And you are not alone, even when you feel most isolated. There are people who will believe you, resources that will help you, and paths forward that lead not just to survival but to a life of purpose and connection beyond what you can currently imagine. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate is not one anyone would choose. But having found myself on this path, I'm determined to illuminate it for others, to leave markers that might guide those who come after, to build supports where I found none, to create the resources I desperately needed in my darkest moments. This is how we transform tragedy into legacy, not by forgetting what happened, but by ensuring it creates ripples of protection and empowerment that extend far beyond our individual experience. Not by pretending betrayal doesn't leave scars, but by showing how those very scars can become sources of wisdom and strength when properly understood. Trust yourself. Document everything. Find allies who believe in you. This is not paranoia, it's self-preservation. And sometimes, as in my case, it's the difference between life and death. But even when the stakes aren't that dramatic, these principles lead to something equally important: a life lived authentically, on your own terms, guided by your own clear perceptions rather than someone else's convenient lies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.